Hi everyone, this is James from LLP, and today we are doing a podcast with Jake Reed, who just published a wonderful paper with us in the LLP journal. The details you will be able to see, I think, on the screen now. Yes, I just need to scroll it down. Okay, so the title of Jake's paper was "This Class Doesn't Have a Textbook," and it was an overview of a TRPG course that he created for L2 English learners in Japan. The unique points of this paper are that, he's using a TRPG, there was no textbook, and the paper is a walkthrough paper. So if I scroll up, you can see, this is a walkthrough paper. So he is introducing the background to his study, the design of the study, the good points, the bad points, and how he would implement it again if he had the chance. So in the terms of game design, essentially. So without further ado, we will dive straight in. We're also joined today, by above me you can see Fabio Spano, and to my, I guess that's my left, whoa, that way, we have Paul Johnson. And these are two of the reviewers of the three reviewers. We didn't hear from the third reviewer for the podcast, so we have two reviewers, myself as the editor and Jake as the author. So the structure of this podcast is going to be, we'll introduce the Ludic, the language, and the pedagogy elements of the paper, and then the reviewers will talk about the exciting or interesting or surprising elements that they found, and finally Jake will wrap us up with his best bits, if you like. So let's begin. Jake,
all right, so
tell us about the Ludic
the
of your paper. Well, I guess you can give us a little bit of background as well. Like, where did the paper start? Tell us about your background.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I am a gamer, of course, and a TRPG gamer. So I played Dungeons and Dragons and similar types of tabletop role-playing games since I was a teenager. And so I wanted to kind of marry something that I really like, my hobby, with my teaching. And why would I want to do that? But the reason is because I wanted my students to have access to kind of real materials or authentic materials, things that quote unquote native speakers use just to have fun, in a way that they could control. So, a TRPG by its nature is very open. So even the person telling the story, the GM, doesn't really know what the players are going to do. So they might start the story out, they'll give the setting and the conditions in which the players find themselves, but they don't know what the players are going to decide. Are they going to go left or right? Are they going to talk with that character that I put out or not? And I thought that was a really interesting setting to explore what kinds of language learning might take place.
Yeah, so just to maybe poke into that a little bit then. So what you're describing then is that maybe the authentic language would kind of emerge from this kind of unknown scenario. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So in that way, it's not scripted equals authentic. Is that the thought process here?
Yeah, I think part of it, yes. And
Cool.
It's also authentic in the sense that it's actually, Dungeons and Dragons and City of Mist. Those are both, authentic materials in a language teacher sense that are used by players.
Should
their first language.
Should mention that both of the reviewers are also TRPG players, right? Paul, would you like to tell us a little bit about your own experience with TRPGs?
Myself? So actually a little interesting. When I first thought about using this in the language classroom, one of the first papers I came across was one that Jake had written before.
Interesting.
So that was really cool. He talked about the potential affordances, and so it was really cool to see, what was potential became actual.
Nice.
That he submitted to LPP, which I thought was really great.
How about your gaming proclivities, Paul? What kind of flavor of TRPG do you play yourself?
I've played some D&D a few times, and I've GM'd a campaign as well.
Okay,
That's about it for me, and then I've used it in the classroom.
excellent. Fabio, how about yourself, sir?
Well, playing tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons is the best thing I've ever done. I loved every second, and I will never stop doing it. There is an episode of Futurama when they finish in the void, and they say, "Okay, who wants to play D&D forever?" And I always cheer, like, "Me! I want to play D&D forever." So yes, it was a forming experience. It's actually, I strongly believe, and it's on my LinkedIn page, that my experience with D&D is what actually boosted my social skills so
Interesting.
much. I think it's directly related to it. And I never been brave enough to try it in a classroom.
Right.
And yes, that's why I was so interested and surprised by the paper I've been reading, especially the one I reviewed, the Jake's paper, because it takes a lot of courage to try to propose that to a classroom, especially when you're teaching English, right? Because it's so dense, it could be so complicated. There is so many things involved and so many things that the students have to remember. So yeah, I love it, but yeah, I wish I would be that brave soon, because for us player, that will be the best, right? If we manage to teach English like high level, high quality instruction by playing Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or whatever.
Well,
That's a dream.
You have a little bit of a manual now. Now we've got Jake's paper to show how it can actually be done.
Oh
right?
yeah.
And in
sure,
terms of like maybe it not working once for your class, I just finished rereading Thornberry's 30 language teaching methods, and just encourage people to just give stuff a try. Give a different method a try, or give tabletop role playing a try in your classroom. If it doesn't work the first time, that's just too high of a bar. Often things don't work the first time. Even really good teaching methods, like task-based or some sort of communicative method, we use it and we try. It doesn't always work the first time, but that doesn't mean it's not good.
Yeah, iterate.
Right? So go for it.
You'll notice that
I should add that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I should add that this particular class that I taught, on the one hand, students that enrolled in it, to a certain degree, knew that they were getting into a games class or a class that would use role-playing games. On the other hand, not all of them that joined the class were necessarily gamers. There were many that joined because of, extraneous factors like their schedule. Well, it fits the schedule and I need credits that are, right, this sort of thing. But I think the gamers that were in the class, they kind of became little leaders, if you will. Those students ended up becoming the GMs for their groups, or at least for one of the games. And they were able to hopefully impart some of their passion for the game onto the ones that weren't really gamers. And for some of the ones that weren't really into it, they, in their recordings, I could listen to some of their homework assignments, and students that I'd had in other, more general English classes that almost never said anything were at least talking a little bit in the games that they were playing. Maybe because it's a ludic setting, and maybe because they're with their friends and that sort of thing.
Awesome. We've kind of gone into a lot of topics straight off the bat. I'm going to wrap it right the way back to the start, even though that's a fascinating topic, which leads into social cultural theory and scaffolding and all that kind of thing. But we've got Jonathan here as well now. So right, we have another one of our. Let's jump into the three topics. So first of all, then, I know we've talked about TRPGs a lot now, but tell us about the three TRPGs that you chose for your students to play, and just tell us a bit about them.
Okay, so I designed the course over 3 segments, or blocks, as I call them in the paper, and I thought about it from a kind of difficulty perspective. So easy, normal mode and hard mode. And the first one was called Molecular Scenarios, which was a homebrew thing made by a friend of mine in the States. And that is basically one A4 page adventure. So it's one A4 page for the GM. It tells them, this is the setting, these are the rules, and the players have a page too that helps them make a character. It just uses D6, similar to Paul's game that he's making now. And so it's super easy. You can do it in 10-15 minutes. It takes a little longer than that for the non-gamers to kind of figure out what's going on. And I had a class set aside to teach that, but we were done with that in 3 lessons. The second game that we moved into was called City of Mist, and that was a Kickstarter a while back. And it was touted as a kind of entry-level TRPG for people that weren't really familiar with the genre. In the past, games like D&D or Pathfinder have gone through periods of extremely kind of complex rule systems and very much targeted to their core audience of tabletop gamers. Now, with things like Stranger Things and D&D 5th edition being simplified much more than it was before, I think they're moving into a kind of a phase where they're attracting new gamers again. But despite that, 5th edition being a quote-unquote simpler version of D&D, that is still, in my view, pretty hard, maybe for second language speakers, especially if they don't know what's going on starting out. So that was the third game that we went into.
As a complete noob then, okay. So sorry, you did City of Mist and then D&D as the final game?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. What was I going to ask? So yeah, what makes City of Mists? Why did you choose City of Mists?
Well, it's more focused on the narrative and telling the story than it is about check the rules to find out what this spell does and see exactly how many spaces it affects. And these are the dice you need to roll. This game only uses D6s.
What is a D6 for those that don't know?
A D6 is a 6-sided die. So the die that you'd find in Monopoly. So if a player wants to try something, say they want to open up a door that's locked, they don't have the key, they want to try to force it open, and they have a crowbar or something. So they might say, okay, I want to roll this dice, but my character has a power tag on it that says really strong or macho man or something like that. And then they'll ask the GM, can I use this macho man tag to increase my roll? And the GM will say yes or no, depending on the circumstances. If they say yes, the player can add a +1 to their roll. So they roll the 2 D6s, and if they get 6 or less, it's a fail. If they get 7 to 9, it's yes, you succeed, but GM make up some kind of inhibiting factor that happens. And if it's 10 or more, they just succeed in the way that the player envisioned it.
Okay.
So it's really, really story-based, and that's seriously it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just those 2 dice. You want to do something, okay, roll that and see what happens. You match it with your character's power tags. And
may I ask then, finally, how does that compare to D&D then? What's D&D like in comparison?
Yeah, so D&D...
everyone's smiling when I ask this question.
They have something what's called Session 0. Now, D&D, a tabletop game, is organized into sessions. And you'd think, okay, session 1, let's play the game. Okay, yeah, session 2, let's play the game again and continue. Yes, but D&D, a game like D&D really requires what's called a session 0, where it has a lot of things going on in it. But one of the things that happens is that you make your character. So you get together at the table and you think, okay, what kind of character do I want to make? And making a character can be as simple as, rolling some dice and not really caring. Just that one is fine. Or it can be as complicated as, well, I'm going to be a human, but I want to choose the variant human subtype, which gives me this extra ability. And that ability will allow me to play this sorcerer class better than if and it goes down a rabbit hole.
Gotcha.
Just for character creation.
Okay, so just to wrap up this section on the Ludic then, on the screen now is actually the blocks. So the block 1 is the molecular scenarios. Block 2 is the City of Mist, and block 3 says Dungeons and Dragons. So if you could add a kind of slider to say level of complexity and focus on like language output, what would you put on the 3 blocks, like block 1, block 2, block 3? Is there like a high level of complexity but actually a high level of output as well, or what if I'm a teacher and I'm thinking of using one of these?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say for block 1, I mean it's over so fast, and the missions are so quick and so concise that you wouldn't probably expect too much from that, but I think it is a good introduction to the genre. For block 2 and 3, I think you could get the same complexity of language from either of them.
Interesting.
Because it's just, you're telling a story, you're going back and forth, you're interacting together, you're confirming the description that the GM gave you, or confirming what the players want to do. Those are largely the same. The difference is in the rules and in the amount of adjudication that is sometimes necessary.
Interesting.
In City of Mist, it's very much like, okay, this is what happened. You guys kind of make it up as you go. And then the GM is the ultimate arbitrator. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you can play it that way. But there's also a 350 whatever page rule book that you could play it in a very analytical way too, if you wanted.
Gotcha. Okay, that segues as Paul. Yeah, sure, man.
Oh yeah, so the bit of tabletop role playing I've played, it's just been the 5th edition of D&D, which everyone tells me is a simplified version, and I cannot imagine what an unsimplified version would be. If this is the easy mode, I don't want to be anywhere near the hard mode.
Well, Fabio mentioned Pathfinder before, so
Man.
I know he knows what the complicated ones are.
Overwhelmed.
Like session and session for only one encounter, only one battle, just because the rules are so long, so many. So you can spend 8 hours just fight with one fight. Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into the language then of this. We've looked at the Ludic, the TRPG. We've looked at this idea of molecular scenarios, which Jake's friend produced for him, which is a 1-pager that can be completed in a couple of sessions. Students are generally talking about the language. Yeah, okay. I'll let you do it, Jake. So the molecular scenarios, what kind of language production are we focused on here? And then of course the same for City of Mist and D&D. What's the production? What language goals did you have? What did you expect from the games themselves, etc., etc.?
I did not have any specific like grammar or vocabulary lists or language goals for the students in any of the 3 games that I brought to the table. But what I was trying to do more was to just because a TRPG is so diverse, it's like bringing a novel into the classroom, but a novel that you don't know what's going to happen on anything other than page 1. So I don't know what's going to happen after that. And the kinds of language they produce are going to be very diverse. But things like request formation, confirmation checks, and I figure there's going to be a lot of breakdown in communication. And that's where I was coming from pedagogically as well. And then in those episodes of breakdown, they're going to have to negotiate. They're going to have to use circumlocution if they are just speaking English. If they're speaking some Japanese, and they probably did, I know some of them did, and that's a kind of circumlocution, I suppose. It's just part of the interaction hypothesis, which I based the theoretical framework of the course on.
Would you say then, just to compare sorry, Jonathan, just before that, then the 3 different TRPGs that you played, when I was listening to you describe them from a teacher's perspective, I was thinking, well, the first one, there's a little bit of reading. The second one, there's quite a lot of reading. And then the third one, there's an intense amount of reading. So in terms of language skills, I'm not just looking at what are they saying during the gameplay, but what are they having to do? Are they doing some skimming, some scanning? They're, reading long sentences, paragraphs, and it seems that the more complex that it got, the more not just cognitive load, but it's engaging more of their language systems in a way. Would you say that was something that you considered as well?
Absolutely. When we applied to teach these courses, part of what you had to do was explain how the 4 skills were going to be used in the course, or what the students were going to be doing in all 4 of those skills. The students, before they enroll in those classes, they've had writing courses, they've had reading courses where they learn these kind of skimming, scanning, and paragraphing, and that sort of thing. So they should be applying those skills in the course that I was teaching.
Right.
Of course, a little bit of review is necessary. But in my case, the reading was the rule books and the game materials, as you pointed out. The speaking and listening is while they're playing the sessions together. And the writing was from the transcriptions and the journals that I had them keep as homework assignments while they were playing the games. So they'd keep an in-character journal if they were a player, and that would try to help them role play more. And the GM would keep like a GM notebook. What did you do this session? How did the players react? What problems did you have? And it was, not in character, but yeah, so that sort of thing is what they did for the writing.
Yeah, just to jump in before John, I know Jonathan had his hand up, but just one final thing then is that the language that you're not pushing, but that's probably not the right word. Yeah, let's just say that you're pushing them to use in the class is clearly you've got a strong focus on all 4 skills here. Now, if I was just to give them a TRPG and say play, maybe I'm not focusing all those 4 skills. So pedagogically, you had to actually do something in order to get a focus on those 4 skills, would you say? It appears like that from an outside perspective, that, the writing is clearly not a skill that they perhaps wouldn't do if they were just to play a TRPG in class. Therefore, you as the teacher thought, well, how can I get them to write as well then? And then you had to do something. That seems fair, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's right.
Jonathan, did you have a question?
Yeah, sure. I think it's wonderful how you're getting the students to use all 4 skills, and it seems really aligned to your curriculum. It's impressive. It really is. My question is about something that bridges the language and the ludic, the idea of the content or the fantastical nature of the RPGs that you used. Like, what was your decision process in deciding to use like D&D or like a fantasy setting, and not, I think, and not a more realistic setting, like something like Fiasco, or like something set in the, like a Dirty World, or something set in the modern age? Like, how did you? Yeah, like, like, oh, okay, my she-orc wields the +1 staff of fire breath versus the dragon skin. Like the content is not what's usually found in a Japanese university textbook, right? So, like, can you talk a little bit to that? Like, I'm not against it. I think it's wonderful, but for another teacher who's goes, yeah, that's really interesting. There's obviously a lot of language skill going on, but I don't know anything about half-elf wizards.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, I'm glad you asked that question. It was something that I considered when I was choosing the materials, and one of the biggest decisions was simply familiarity, my own familiarity with the game. That's one of the things I think is really important when a teacher is going to bring something into the classroom. They should know about it themselves. They should have a certain degree of passion about it, because if they don't, I think that the students will smell that. They'll pick up on that. It's like, oh, the teacher is just not really into this. Like, this is just busy work now or whatever. So I didn't want to risk that by bringing in something that I wasn't myself passionate about. However, as far as the modern world goes, City of Mist actually is the second game in the that I introduced to them. And for the final project, like if they were going to play their own game and record it, with their friends from their high school or whatever, they could choose City of Mist or D&D, whichever of the genres they were more comfortable with, or whichever the rule set they liked more. and
Yeah.
a lot of them did like City of Mist. I don't recall if they said they liked it because of the genre or simply because the rules were easier, or it was the one they played first. They played that before D&D. They
Yeah.
got into learning it, and then suddenly I said, now play D&D. It's even more difficult to learn. And so
Very
that was
cool.
one of the
That's
one of
wonderful.
the negative
No, that's
things
great.
in the course.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Fabio.
Thanks.
Yeah, so building up on that, since we're talking about language, right? You mentioned the willing to communicate and how the affective filters is usually like made thinner by thinking about creatures or thinking not being yourself, right? And I was wondering if like detaching from reality and going into a fantasy world will actually even help that process. I'm not sure we can answer that question, but I'm just would like to know your thoughts. Being like further from reality, going into a fantasy world, will that help the shyness problem that you actually mentioned, being there in Japan, being as far as possible from reality? What do you think?
I personally think so. I don't know if I have any data to back that up other than anecdotal or what, folks have told me, or just the number of hours that I've played, tabletop games in where I'm pretending to be someone that I'm not for 8 hours straight, right? And then yeah, it is interesting. And it's something that I wrote in the paper, I think, about this kind of displacement of who you are, and it in a sense it allows you to kind of take risks
Yeah.
That you wouldn't otherwise take if you were you, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well,
No,
but I
absolutely.
think you
Yeah.
explained it better than I did.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm getting it. Yes, you mentioned it on the paper. Yeah.
You did. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just personally, I feel that way when I am role playing as a character. I'll say things as that character that I'd never say as Jake, right? So
there's nothing James York won't say. I digress. The pedagogy of the paper, then. Give us your third, the L. We talked about the first L, the second L, and now the P. You mentioned very briefly earlier about the interaction hypothesis. So pedagogically, we also mentioned the scaffolding that you did to help them write. Anything else that you'd like to mention regarding the pedagogy, the focus of you as the teacher and what you did, your choices that you made, materials, mediation, this kind of thing?
Well, as far as the pedagogical aspect, I was more active in the beginning when I'm trying to introduce the rules and the concept of the game, especially that first one with the molecular scenarios. I really wanted them to understand, what is a GM and what is a GM's job. A GM's role is not to just kill all the players, right? It's to, and I actually had some students that were doing that, and they thought it was a competitive game, and the GM like, well, no, it's not quite. It's not quite like that. So there were a lot of teachable moments that came out of observing the groups in action in the very early parts. But once they got going, and once they started understanding what's happening in these games and started getting a feel for it, it was very hands off. So I really stepped back and didn't want to intrude on them and make them think, oh, well, I can't speak English unless the teacher is there. And I don't want them to think that. Or I can't play this unless I ask Jake first. I try to encourage them to make mistakes and be okay with it. That at the end of the day, if they mess up a rule, it doesn't really matter. The point of the game is to have fun. You mediate those situations where you're not sure whether you're following the correct rules, and you come to a consensus in the group and you move on. And some groups dealt with that kind of freedom better than others. It's all gonna vary. Your mileage will vary.
That's that talks of your Nanda. That talks of your mediation, your involvement during the gameplay. But you're selling yourself short perhaps by not mentioning all of the work you had to do in preparing the course, like how the before playing stuff, all the reflection activities, the materials you made quizzes. There's a lot of stuff that you also did there. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I made a lot of quizzes. I made, the final project guidelines, and of course what else did I make? The simplified rules for D&D.
Oh, you actually did simplify the rules further for the third
Yes.
block. Interesting. Okay.
Yes, because even the rules as are, even though, they produced a player's handbook, which is the 300-page thing, and then they had a very simple one about 32 pages, but even that was still, biblical like style, 2-3 columns text, double page, and it's not, high frequency vocabulary. So yeah, I simplified it. I think I included it as an appendix, probably. Yeah, a couple of them. The second and the third appendices are the simplified versions of that rule book that I made. So there was things like that, and yeah, just all of the gaming that I did just growing up. I think that's part of the preparation. Doesn't mean you have to do all of that, and you don't have to have played for 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. But if you do, it helps because you really understand what's going on.
All right. I'm going to come back to you for some more questions regarding what was good, what was bad. Maybe we'll come back to you for those in a moment. But let's jump to the reviewers who looked at this paper, who are both keen TRPG players. What are your thoughts, starting with Paul then?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the paper. Again, reading your first one that talked about what it could do, and then reading this one where you talked about what you did was like really cool, kind of inspiring. And to see the way that you managed, as I mentioned, I haven't played much D&D. My main interest is in using it in the classroom, right? But trying to like take this big game and simplify it down and use it in the classroom. You just did a really great job of that. And a great job of like, when I first thought about doing this, I was all thinking in this quantitative style. Pre-test, post-test, all that sort of stuff. And maybe someone much smarter than me could figure out how to do that with something like a tabletop role-playing game.
I don't think you need to be that smart, Paul. You put yourself down. All you do is you make the GM scenario, look at vocab that you think's going to come up, get them to play it, and see if they remembered it afterwards. There's a simple enough study for you.
Okay, simple. Okay, but I like the way you took like the qualitative approach. I think was really good,
nice.
And I think that that's kind of like the best way to go about it. Even if we said like language that they're likely to use, you might like the RPGs. They can just go totally off the rails. They can go do some other thing, then just never use the target language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you did really well with that. Can I ask a question that I'm really interested in? Maybe later or something. I'd love to hear you talk more about two things. One is like, you said you have some pretty shy students. What do you think the impact of having them in one of the rooms and leaving them? How beneficial do you think that was? And the other question I have is, I'd love to hear more about grading. The grading part. Right? I thought that was really interesting.
Go for it.
To see the way you use the XP system.
Yeah. Should I answer those?
Go
now?
for it. Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, sure. So first about the shy students and having them kind of in their own little rooms, which was a luxury, I have to say. I mean, not all places are going to have like, oh yeah, you can just have these 8 rooms just for your class. Like, so that was definitely nice. Of course, you could tell students to, okay, go, here's your group. The play time is going to happen outside of class. You could design it that way. Though that is kind of a big ask on students too, considering how long sessions can take. But if you do have a situation where the students are in, by themselves and they're not really being listened to by anyone else, I think just a smaller group. I mean, this is true of like just small group work, right? If you're teaching a class, at least in my university in Japan, and you ask a question to everyone, no one's going to raise their hand. But if you have them in a small group of 4 or 5 and you give them an activity or a task, and then you give them some time and you go around while they're all working and you just talk to that group of 5 individually, they're much more likely to say something, at least in my experience, than they are to speak in front of the entire class where they don't necessarily know all their classmates, and it's face threatening. So with a tabletop game, they're in the same room with, crucially, the same people every time. So after 3, 4, 5 sessions like this, hopefully they don't hate each other, but if ideally they start to get to know each other's, quirks and get to know what each other, what they like, and maybe they even have some side banter about not even the game. And that's totally fine. That's all a part of the tabletop experience, I think, is that kind of side discourse, the stuff that's happening outside the game. And that, it's my hope, will help those shy students, speak more, at least in that small world that they've created. And as for the grading, so it was an XP based system, which was just something I did after I read a few books on gamification. It was Carl Kapp's book, I think. I know gamification is kind of it's a dangerous word around here.
It's fine, man.
But no, I mean, I wanted to just try to see, is this gonna have any effect on students' output? Is it gonna be, and if it doesn't, then who cares? It's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool way to, instead of saying, okay, you got an A, basically a punitive style of grading, right? Is how the typical grading scale works, is that you start with a 100 and you're slowly getting inched down towards an F the less stuff you submit, right? But I wanted them to think about it more of the, like, okay, you're leveling up, you're every time you do something, you get some points for it. And I know that's very, behaviorist, and maybe it's not really the best way to go about motivating people to do things, especially for the long term. But at least for the class, I thought it was kind of fun to kind of, give them the sense of like accomplishment every time they had done something, similar to how their characters are doing in the game. When they complete an encounter, the GM gives them some XP, they level up, they get new abilities. So that was fun. I'm still thinking about what abilities I want to give students in the real world. Whether that's a good idea.
Ability to speak English.
I really like how the stuff that they did to get the grade wasn't in-game stuff, right? That seems like key to me. Yeah.
Yep, it was all the journals and the transcriptions, and they could actually meet with me too. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think. I mean, I don't want to put a downer on it, but I think you could perhaps really stifle the learning opportunities if it was that every time you say something in the RPG gameplay session, you get a point. I think that would just destroy the playfulness of the actual session itself. So yeah, just in case anybody was wondering if Jake was gamifying his classroom like that, he certainly wasn't, were you? Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that will be
I didn't
right?
judge them. Sorry, Fabio.
Fabio.
No, I'm saying that will kill the authenticity that we're talking about, right? Not authentic language anymore. There's just like speak as much as you can to get points. So it will have killed it. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Fabio, tell us about your experience reading Jake's paper as a squire. Somebody that's amazing at TRPGs. What did you think about this innovative approach?
Well, this approach, like, it makes me happy because I love, our TRPG in general. I love Dungeons and Dragons. Everybody should play Dungeons and Dragons. I truly believe that. But the thing that struck me when I was reading the paper is from a teacher perspective, from somebody who's approaching GBLT as a researcher, practitioner, future practitioner, and so on, is how much we need these kind of papers, right? How much we need examples, how much we need walkthrough, how much we need people who try this stuff and tell us, like, this was good, this was bad, this is what I did before, and this is what I would have done differently. So yeah, of course, the teaching with a tabletop RPG is amazing, but in order to spread the love, we need papers like Jake's paper. Absolutely. Yeah. And on this point, I would like to ask you to share your experience into testing something like this big and with this much potential. Like, what would you have done differently? Because I remember reading one advice that I really liked, because you played 3 games, but in your paper you mentioned that students were frustrated because they wanted to continue play with the system that they just learned instead of learning a new system. That was very good. And for somebody as excited as I am, without reading that paper, I might have made the same mistake, right? But now I'll take that into consideration. So that was great advice. So I'll turn all this excitement into a question. Do you have another advice? Or something that you will have done differently if you could go back, redesigning or redoing this experience?
Yeah. I think there are things that I want to try. I don't know if they will bear fruit, as you never really know until you try. But one of the things is to, maybe make as you said, choose one game, and that's going to be your focus. And then that makes it so that the medium itself doesn't become a weight.
Interesting.
And then more focus and more attention can be paid to things like language acquisition, which should be the focus of the course, right? It shouldn't just be playing games and if it's an English class, and it was. So that is a really good thing that I want to try, even though I am excited to try a bunch of different stuff. And it's a bit selfish of me to do that, but I do want to have them just do one. Another thing is maybe before I kind of let them go off on their own and do the hands-off approach like I did this past time, is to give them more guidance in the beginning, to try to avoid some of those pitfalls of, like, oh, is this a competitive game? I mean, nothing I said, I don't think, should have confused students into thinking it was a competitive game, but nevertheless, it was confused in that way with at least one group. And maybe even thinking about just grouping, because the groups that I assigned were just completely random, except for the GM volunteers. And it's possible that some of the students in my class were friends and that they'd been taking the class together. I didn't really check that. Just got into it, started swimming, right? But if I'd known, like, oh, those guys are friends and they kind of want to make a group together, then it would overcome maybe some of that shyness that some students might have if they're in a group suddenly with strangers, with people they don't know. So
may I think about
like that, try.
May I say one thing about, the GM wanted to kill the players? I explained Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder to a couple of hundreds of people, I guess. And, like you, I never said anything that would have, suggested that it was a competition. But the first question most of these hundreds of people I talked to asked was, how do you win? Or who wins?
Who wins?
Right? That's a concept that when you see the word game and play, everybody has, like, there is a way to win. And when we switch to tabletop RPGs, you actually have to take that idea and take it out. So even if you didn't say anything to that, I think that idea was already there. You didn't implant it; it was already there. How do you win? Nobody wins, or everybody wins, whatever you like. So I don't think you said something that misled them. They already had that in their minds.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
All right, Jake. Tell us what you're most proud of. What's your highlight of the whole thing?
Well, the biggest moment for me in the course was just how the class felt like I was at a tabletop convention every time I went. Like, just twice a week. The students would show up with their dice and their character sheets and their folios, and we'd have the very short meeting in the beginning, and they'd go to their rooms and they'd just get into it. And some of them would have they'd be using the monitor inside of the study rooms and setting it up like a map. And some of them would be drawing on the board, keeping track of combat and different statistics. Some of them were playing music. And it's like, I didn't give them any kind of, this is how to be a good DM explanations. I just let them try things. And then, some people just naturally started becoming storytellers and setting the scene. So that was just really beautiful for me to see that immersion. As for the project itself, writing the paper, I think it was a really good opportunity to reflect on the course that I taught now 5 years ago or so.
Wow, 5 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while. And actually to, get my work out there, I've been sitting on this stuff for years, and just finally, I had a lot of support from this community to actually just get things into gear and start writing a little bit each day, and finally getting it done. So I have to give a big thanks to all of you guys here for the encouragement and the feedback that I got in the review process, and just the whole thing has been really awesome. So those are my moments.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Super cool.
Hey everyone, this is James, and that was the LLP podcast number 13, where we listened to Jake and the reviewers talk about his paper, which is using TRPG games in a Japanese EFL context. I realized that we didn't actually record a proper ending during the session, so I'm just doing it now ad hoc. If you want to know anything else, anything more about the paper, if you want to read the paper, you'll find a link in the description, as well as links to the journal and our social media outlets. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Thank you.